Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me as always is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Steven. How's it going?
My friends, it is going very well. We are back on Awesome Truth, Walt. We took a little break. We banked a bunch of episodes, and we haven't talked in a while, and we're back. We're actually literally back doing Awesome Truth. It's delightful.
Yeah, it was nice hiatus from wrestling anything for a bit.
Yeah.
Although, I don't know. It seems like there's always something going on where I can't really escape it.
Well, we banked that Punk episode, and then, of course, there was, as we're recording this, Punk has returned. So we did miss the boat a little there, but I think our general sentiments of he used to be cool and now he's pissy, I think those still held up, when the episode came out.
Yeah, I mean, no one would call us topical. I mean, and by design, we aren't topical.
No.
So
It's too hard to be topical, especially when you've done 150 episodes, right?
It's kind of like a bullseye, and we're always on like the outer rim of the bull. I don't know what that area is called,
Yeah,
but it's
I don't
just
know
not the
anything about
bullseye, all right?
darts.
Neither do I.
No, but you're right. We're close.
So-
We're close enough to make it count. If you're playing a get to a lot of points kind of darts, we're good at that. But we're not going to get you the full score.
And today's episode is outer rim around that. So
Yes,
we're always kind of close.
We're a
on
little.
the board.
I don't want to say we're out of date because this just came out a few weeks ago, but it is not. Again, we didn't drop everything and record this when the episode aired. But as you sort of hinted at, we are talking about another episode of Dark Side of the Ring, the show that may be disappearing at this point. I imagine is probably not long for this world, at least in this current state. But it's airing right now on Vice, I believe. Is that correct? Vice is still a thing at the moment?
Vice is still a thing.
Vice, it still exists as of this recording again, and we're talking about the Chris and Tammy episode, which of course, that's a little vague. It's the Chris Candido and Sunny episode. So this is one I think that everyone was very excited for, Walt, because Sunny is, was the hottest thing in wrestling literally in the 90s, as we'll talk about. You and I, as young men of that era, would certainly have concurred. And since then has been fraught with scandal and craziness, and certainly seems like an unwell person, and has made a lot of headlines, mostly bad, almost entirely bad. And then, of course, Chris Candido is not with us and has not been with us for quite a while. So I think this seemed like a really great one to talk about because of all the stuff that went on behind the scenes. And while I don't think it was a bad episode, and while I think there's still plenty to talk about, I don't think there was a ton of earth-shattering information here that I didn't basically already know.
No, I mean,
and maybe that's always the case because we know lots of stuff because we follow these things relatively closely.
yeah, to me, it feels like this could have gone so many different directions. They could have tripled down on Tammy Sytch's legal woes and recent like years. They could have really honed in on the infidelity with Shawn Michaels in the 90s. But to me, I don't watch this for like new information because I think the nature of all wrestling documentaries is you're going to get to a certain point and then they're going to protect the business and protect a lot of different secrets. And so this feels like kind of like broad strokes. Like this is the story. This is like a profile almost. And like, to me, I thought they covered everything that they needed to within an hour. And like, so I felt more positive about it, but I also didn't have the expectation of like learning something crazy new, I guess. Maybe that's my expectation.
And you're right. And like, I try not to hold them to the standard of teach me or teach Walt something new. I think neither one of us does because like that doesn't make any sense. Like we live in 2023. There's just very little information we don't already have. At least tidbits or inklings or something like that. Like it's rare to be dropped a totally new piece of info, given all the podcasts, documentaries, books we've been inundated with for decades now. There's just not a ton out there that we're not somewhat aware of. So yeah, I don't mean to judge it to that standard. I guess more my idea was I was interested in how they would, like, maybe there was just motivations or backstage stuff or inklings into personalities. And I guess this episode does have a lot of that because one thing I will say, we've lamented this show or spoke sort of ill of the show because sometimes it relies on a lot of the same voices. Like Jim Cornette basically has a residency on Dark Side of the Ring at this point, like for every topic under the moon, whether he was intimately involved or not. But this one had, Mick Foley, Jim Cornette, Chris Candido's brother, Lance Storm. Like, they had a lot. They had people who were there, like not just people who know wrestling and were, you know, related, somewhat involved with these people. People who were there for all of this. Sort of Dr. Tom Pritchard. Like, these were intimates of Chris and Tammy, and so I think that's really great. Like, when you can get me someone who has rubbed shoulders with them, been friends with them, has, you know, real you know, insight into their inner workings. That, I think, is an example of something we don't typically get in all of these.
Yeah, I mean, typically when you see Cornette, it's like, oh god, what bullshit am I going to do?
In his little
this time?
attic
But,
with the, you know, all the stuff on the walls, like, it's almost
Yeah,
a joke
right.
at this point, seeing him come in. I'm like, oh, Jim's here.
yeah, but I think in this case, like, obviously it was organic to the story, which, you know, that's called a good booking. You know, you have someone who can tell this side, and, you know, if you believe Jim Cornette and you believe wrestling lore, you believe shysters, you know, then he did create these characters, and he did bring them in, he did scout them, he did kind of like shepherd them to the next stage of their career, which, you know, was WWF. Whether or not that was successful is a different story. But, you know, and like, it was nice to see a Pritchard not named Bruce kind of give the history of wrestling for once, and it made I totally forgot that, like, Skip and Zip, like, I totally forgot that was like Tom Pritchard, and like, now there's just so much about Chris Candido that I've forgotten about that. To me, it was nice to revisit. Now, I could have used more Barry. What the hell was Barry Horowitz doing?
Yes, my note in there is we better get some Barry Horowitz in this. Parentheses, I do not think we are.
Right.
But that wasn't. I mean, that's, to me, was, you know, we're half joking about that, but it was maybe his best angle. And I mean, there's the one they showed where the Bodydonnas against the Godwins. I mean, I think those are the two Candido WWF highlights of that series, right? Like the Barry Horowitz thing, where Barry Horowitz got his first win, and then winning the tag titles against the Bodydonna, or against the Godwins. Like, those were his two peaks, right? They're not big peaks, but
yeah, those were easily his two peaks. I mean, he definitely is the Jim Cornette tutelage, because he just loved he was like really good at showing ass.
yes.
Isn't that the term, right? Where
Yeah,
it's
when
like,
you just when you just look like a fool, right? And you're just taking shit always, and
nothing was more foolish than like being the guy to lose to Barry Horowitz, where they really made that a story, which it was so indicative of 1995 booking and the roster, but more so to the fact that, like, Chris Candido was the perfect person to lose to this man and have that story. So,
which, as a kid, when I was 10 years old, I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy Barry Horowitz? It was a fun story, right? Like, it was the ultimate underdog. Like, I got it when I was a kid.
As a 10-year-old, I thought I was all Barry Horowitz. I
don't think we had the shirt with the handprint on the back, though, did we?
No. But I thought about it. They really plugged it as a impressionable 10-year-old. I was like, I'm all in. This guy's going places.
That was a great example, too, because back in the 95, let's say, they weren't making shirts for everybody. You know, there was no WWEshop.com. Like, to get a shirt was a pretty big deal. So the fact that there was a Barry Horowitz shirt at all, like, that was a very 2000s, 2010s type vibe that they were pitching in 95. Like, even if it was self-made, like, the fact that just was not. Now, of course, Barry Horowitz would have 100 shirts, you know, but it was relatively novel back then to even come up with that idea.
I don't even think the Bodydonnas
I
a shirt.
highly doubt they had a shirt. Yeah, the
Sonny
Godwins might have had a shirt.
Sonny definitely had a shirt.
Oh, Sonny had a ton of. They were probably just like really bad, you know, JPEG files of her body on, you know, on a heavy black tee. But
you know, it's not like the giant, like, graphic face of Razor Ramon on a shirt. That was like the quintessential 1995.
Yeah, really bad shirts.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive into Candido, because you and I have a history with Candido, not personally, of course, but like as fans, because we, as we've said a million times in the show, grew up in the Northeast, grew up in New Jersey, outside Philly, so we watched ECW a ton, and so we didn't interact with Candido. I mean, we watched the Bodydonnas, but I'm sure at that point we cared 0% about this dude. But of course, we both love the Triple Threat, so for us, Chris Candido is actually a person of consequence, as opposed to WWF fans of that era, where he was sort of a guy you may remember.
Yeah, I mean, again, another era of wrestling that like completely has like I would love to have revisited more of that era of ECW too, and just that faction and his role in it. Like all they really covered was the fact that this guy did the super power bomb,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I didn't realize that was a special move.
I swear he had like a swinging DDT or something too, or
Well, because you can fucking
you can't.
powerbomb
Yeah,
everybody.
you can super powerbomb Jerry Lynn. Maybe that's probably about it.
Well, that was Pitbull number two's move too. Was the super power bomb?
Yeah.
The super bomb, or
I'm sure he had a ground floor finisher too. Like,
yeah,
he
or
also
didn't
wasn't
win a
winning
whole
that
lot.
many matches.
Yeah.
He was sort of a cog in the triple threat machine. So
Yeah. What's funny because it's like Lance Storm. Like when did him and Lance Storm enter? And then it's like I forgot all about the triple threat for Lance Storm and Al Snow.
oh
and,
my God, Lance Storm was intimately involved with the triple threat. Yeah.
Well,
I'm
yeah.
gonna give you aha was Lance Storm.
Yeah, it's funny too to remember that like Sonny was involved in all that as well because like Sonny was such a background player at that point, but like, yeah, I mean, Candido was such a, it's arguably one of the biggest names they had for a while there. Like, I mean, he was Shane Douglas's like second or third behind Bam Bam, but
Yeah. A huge guy, like a genuinely, and I think the documentary touches on that a little bit. They imply, ECW was a better fit for him because he could work, and he could be a bigger fish in a smaller ponds. But I really do think, like, I think the triple threat, especially because back in the day, like that was not like ECW did stables more than other Eastern. Like I guess the NWO changed all that entirely, but like they were
Right.
they were a 3-person stable, as you're saying. That was. The Bam Bam Bigelow is the biggest capital S star in the company because he's from WWF for a decade, and so everybody knows Bam Bam Bigelow. Shane Douglas is the champion, the longtime champion, and just the biggest personality, like just giant. And then Candido is, I guess, the worker, but like also a guy with that WWF shine on him. Like they were a hugely influential trio of guys that were I feel like they were loosely affiliated. Like they didn't. It wasn't so much like we are 3 guys who will beat you up together, but like we are just 3 of the biggest talents in this company, and we are together because why wouldn't we be together? Like we're the best, And I think it was just a very confident, like overpowering threesome at a time, but that really didn't. There wasn't a lot of thought put into it beyond that, and that sort of made it cooler.
Yeah, I mean, I think is I couldn't tell you one match this guy had as the triple threat, but I have a lot of distinct memories of the triple threat.
Just being around, like being around Douglas and but like Bam Bam had the big feud with Taz, and it's not like Shane and Candido were like interfering a ton like the Bloodline now, Like I don't recall them doing that kind of chicanery. Like they just were sort of had each other's backs generally and were loosely affiliated in a way that seemed very, again, very confident, very like we don't need to do a bunch of bullshit, but we're all pals.
Yeah, it was the top faction in ECW for sure, and it's funny too because like Francine and Sonny were like a big part of that as well, and I just remember a lot of like schmazes and run-ins where it was like, oh, it's Candido, then like Francine, and then like Sonny, and so
yeah, that's true. There probably were a lot of run-ins. I guess ECW run-ins were a lot different because that was just sort of how it worked back then. Like there was no real penalty for that.
Yeah, it was like those like long-winded run-in like parades.
Yeah.
Where it's just one person, then the next person from the other side. It's just rinse and repeat for.
And
like
it wasn't
5
about the ref bump and you sneak it in beforehand. The match just devolved into like a giant, clusterfuck.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, classic, vintage mid-90s ECW.
But Candido, so I do wish they talked about that more, because one thing that I do find interesting, and we'll get to Sonny because obviously that's the other half of this story, but at the end of the documentary, they say something about Candido that they say, I feel like about every small guy from the 90s, where they're like, he'd be a star today, he'd be a giant, he'd be a legend, he would just fit in. And certainly in these days, he'd be big. He wouldn't be big. I guess he was never big, but he would be perfectly adequately sized, and he definitely would be a bigger name. And he would fit in, and just he'd have certainly more room to maneuver. But do you actually think Candido would be a star for real these days, were he to travel in time 25 years into the future?
I don't know. Dolph Ziggler's a smaller, good wrestler from latter day, and he's not a star. So like, I think you're right. I hear what you're saying. I think it's an easy thing to say without actually having to prove it. And like, I do think he was cursed with that stupid Bodydonnas. And then I don't know what the hell kind of gimmick he had in Smoky Mountain, where he was just this baby Huey.
You have Jim Cornette there on the show, and like you sort of hinted they talk about I'm Jim Cornette and I found Chris Candido, but you're like you found Chris Candido, then you put him in a bonnet and you put him on your show. Like I don't think you get a ton of credit for that. I don't think that is right. We don't have to sing your praises for that.
Yeah, it's also like the quote unquote Sonny. The Tammy Sytch character of like, oh yeah, everyone's gonna hate you if you act like Hillary Clinton. It's like, yeah, but then could you explain this male character you came up with? Because we're not really talking about this other thing, what clearly was not working, and yet like, you know,
yeah, it sounds like one hit and one miss. It sounds like you were 50-50.
Yeah, right. But in any case, all that is to say is, I don't know where in the pecking order I think Candido was very talented, and I think, you know, I probably give him less credit than he deserves as an in-ring talent, but then again, in 1985, what does that even mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
especially in ECW, the talent there was pretty high.
Yeah, and I can't tell you definitively what this guy's moveset was and what he was capable of. It seemed like from this doc that he actually was very capable. And had a lot of wrestling prowess, so I don't know. I mean, I just think that there's a lot of those guys now, so if anything, it's actually makes it harder in some ways.
And sort of what you touched on is, you know, he definitely seemed, he was one of those guys, or it seemed like, from what we've heard, who just loved the business and was like, I want to be in the business, hard stop, and I will do a lot to do that, you know. And like you said, I will show ass, I will lose to Barry Horowitz, I will have this stupid workout gimmick, like I will be a total loser goober just to get on the show. Great, you know, like that certainly got him to WF, but a lot of those guys could shoot up and spit out, you know, like when your desire to be a wrestler is so apparent, all the assholes, the Shawn Michaels of the world, the Vince McMahons of the world, even the Paul Heymans of the world, they will just use that up until you're done, and then they'll say, well, see you later. And with Chris, that seems like it's a lot what happened. And so maybe the promoters are nicer these days. I don't know. Vince is certainly still around, you know, like Triple H and Shawn Michaels seems to have mellowed a little bit, but they're still the bosses. So like, and Tony Khan seems like, I just don't get the vibe that, like, even if it is a little bit of a sweeter, nicer business, I still think if Chris Candido shows up one day bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, he could be the best worker in the world, and they're still going to run him ragged because that's what they do.
Well, okay. Shawn Michaels isn't trying to fuck his girlfriend in 2023.
And thank God for that. But
you know, so there, at least he has that going for him if he was to appear in the wrestling scene tomorrow. I mean, there's a lot of guys that are described like that, though. But you know, does Chris Candido, Kevin Owens, because they both are similar. They both are sick of wrestling. They want to be in the business so badly, and they're both quote unquote great talents. Like, I don't know, like. It's hard to really compare, but like I never really saw enough from Candido to definitively say he would be a champion today. I mean, in a sense that, like, you know, maybe Dolph Ziggler did have the belt at one point, so did The Miz. So I guess at some point he would have had the belt, but I don't know. I mean, I can't just point at like 1985 Chris Candido and be like, that guy's a champion and he was screwed. It's like, yeah, he was good.
Yeah.
I guess.
I mean, it's one thing this doc touches on, which is sort of the tragedy and the logical sort of rise of Candido, combining the two, is, you know, you can make a strong case. He doesn't really make it anywhere without Sonny, you know, like, or he's one of, you know, 100 guys, even back in the day, like you said, like, he's hungry, he's talented, but there's a lot of hungry and talented guys in 95 and 2023. Like, only one of them is dating the, you know, suddenly the hottest thing in the world. And for a year and change there, Sonny was truly the hottest thing in the world. And it's sort of, that's where obviously the story gets interesting, is because, and one thing I want to say, you know, I hinted at the top of the show, like, you and I loved Sonny when we were 10 years old, like as every 10-year-old, 12-year-old wrestling fan did. Like, it was just the thing to do. But looking back, like, I'm trying not to judge her like her attractiveness in any way, but like it just seems weird, you know? Like it just seemed like we all loved her, but like what like Sable had more of like a gimmick and like an idea, and like obviously they used her in more unique ways. Sunny was just sort of there, and it seemed like there was no one else, and she just like became a vacuum in and of herself, you know? Like she was this woman who everyone just got entranced with, but looking back, I just don't see what her personality doesn't seem that great. Like her interviews were never that good. Like she just didn't do a lot, but for some reason we all were just like, yep, that's it. The number one female wrestling character in the world is Sunny, and I don't totally get why we felt that way.
Well, all right, there's a lot of things to kind of analyze here, but
do you know what I'm saying? Like, do you get my broad point-ish?
Yeah, no, I do.
Without judgment, I just try not to judge her like attractive, you know, because I know that's a big part of it. Certainly a very attractive woman, but there's more to wrestling than just being attractive. Like there's more when you're drawing that kind of money and that kind of attention. It doesn't. It's just being nice looking is only part of the equation.
I felt like in Sunny's case, she started as a manager, and then they started giving her different roles of the company. Like she would interview people, she would be on Livewire or some other iteration of Livewire. She would be on Livewire. An announcer, and then she was hopping as a manager between like different acts, and then so like they used her like primarily as a manager, and like Sable transcended that role, and it's like Sable started as a manager, but then became like a wrestler, and kind of broke that mold in some ways, because like if you remember, Sunny was around at a time that Alundra Blaze and Bull Nakano and Bertha Faye were all wrestling for the women's WWF championship at the time. It's like
those three and
like, she stood out for different reasons, but like at the same time though, it's like you're putting her with Farouk, and Farouk is this weird gladiator. It's like that, now she's with the smoking guns, and now she always took the identity of someone else. Whereas Sable created her own identity from other wrestlers that she started with. So,
maybe you're maybe right. Sunny was malleable. She was like ever present. Like she was all over, and she was around at the beginning of. It wasn't the Attitude Era yet, but like she was. Raw magazine became a thing, and Sunny was on the cover of the first Raw magazine, right? If not the first, then the most. Certainly the most prominent one in our mind.
It was certainly the one I brought onto the playground in 5th grade and got in a lot of trouble for.
Which wasn't really that risque. Like, it was like the swimsuit edition of Sports Illustrated, which I guess you still shouldn't. If you're in 5th grade, they probably would still frown upon you bringing that onto the playground. But they certainly, just calling it Raw, like, if you didn't know what WWF was, you probably think it was like a porno magazine. Cause
it wasn't Nintendo Power, let's put it that way.
That's true.
Also a great periodical from my youth.
But yes, no one's going to get mad if you're reading Nintendo Power. They certainly will raise an eyebrow at Raw.
Yeah, well, Mr. D, God bless that man's soul, definitely had issue with it. He also didn't like wrestling in the first place because he was a wrestling guy. But
yes, this was our 5th grade quote unquote wrestling coach who did not appreciate our enthusiasm for WWF, I would say.
No, he was not a fan. But anyway, yeah, so that was that era of our lives, and in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, and then obviously, after Sunny's peak, which was pretty short, as I think, history and my memory remind us, it did not last very long. And then sort of the downfall begins. And I think one thing I will say about this episode, and like, this is totally me speculating. I don't know anything. I haven't talked to anybody. I haven't read any sort of other idle speculation. But I got the vibe in watching this that Tammy Sytch is still, alive and has gone through a ton of shit in her life. And I get the sense they didn't want to speculate. And maybe that's good, too. Maybe it's good that they didn't throw shit out there and blame her. Because obviously Chris had, his issues, even though everyone seems to think he was a great guy. But certainly as a wrestler, everyone has everyone has some baggage. But they seem like they did not want to say something about Tammy they could not substantiate with relative facts. Like I just think they distinctly did not speculate too much about why certain things may have happened with Chris's death and with Chris's ups and downs and like the trials. Like I just feel like they said some things and they sort of just breezily moved on to the next thing. And again, maybe that's smart, but I do think that took a little bit of bite out of it. I think for anyone who was looking for some sort of expose or some sort of again, drop in from a friend or someone who wanted to throw some shade, I just don't think there was a ton of that.
No, I mean, like you got enough information to recognize the fact that this woman kind of played around with this guy.
Certainly, the Shawn Michaels stuff is the biggest indicator of that, at least from a wrestling standpoint. Like that's where things for Chris started, falling apart.
And I'm sure that there's a ton of causality between drug use and depression from, infidelity. Like I don't think that's a stretch. And I don't think you need much more than that either, because it's like, maybe it's a fear of legality, and Sunny certainly is lawyered the hell up right now because she's trying to stay out of prison for many, many years. So like, maybe there's a fear there, but ultimately too, like if you can't substantiate it, then it is kind of just like, it is what it is. And I think they said it to the degree that I would need to kind of put the pieces together, where it's like, I'm sure there's a million stories they could have told too. Like, and I'm not trying to defend them. It's just like, for me and my viewing experience, like I got what I needed. Like I kind of, and I understand too, where it's like, it's Chris and Tammy, but really it's Chris's story that Tammy happens to be a huge part of. Yeah. Whereas this is in the Sunny episode where we're talking about Chris Candido. Yep. If that makes sense.
And the ironic, I mean, there's tons of irony there. The irony is this was Chris's dream his entire life. Like, he fought so hard for it. His girlfriend shows up, and they're like, you're very attractive. Like, can you talk on a microphone? Kind of. Okay, you have a job. And then, Chris got famous. She got way more famous. And then things sort of fall apart. So, obviously, that alone is a very, very quote-unquote good story, because there's tons of meat on that bone, and it's meat that we're aware of, but that doesn't make it any less valuable. And and the saddest thing that I sort of hinted at is Chris seems like he was a really good guy. Like, it seems like he was a little naive, maybe. He was very committed, maybe blinders on a lot of the time. Like, I mean, I'm showing up, doing my job, being a good soldier, working hard. Oh, my girlfriend is, I'm not going to worry about this. Like, to a detrimental extent, obviously. And that's horrible, because when you see Tom Pritchard and Lance Storm and his brother and all these people tearing up years after the fact, this guy obviously meant a lot to a lot of people. And I don't think, you hear stories about dead wrestlers, unfortunately, all the time. They don't always evoke tears. So when you have this many close confidants talking about him and welling up, that really just reinforces to me this is a man of importance and a man that really mattered to people.
Yeah, I mean, someone as hardened to the business as Jim Cornette, if you got him kind of...
Even more so than him and Dr. Tom both. They've been around for 50 years probably. Yeah,
like that spoke volumes. Where it's like, when Jim Cornette says, "I don't cry a lot when I talk about like deceased wrestlers," like I believe that. I don't think he cries at all for many of them, based on his tweets. Like, it's not like whether that's a gimmick or not. Like, I believe it. So.
Yep. So that's a shame. But I guess the final question as we wrap up here, Walt, is, there's been a lot of dark side of the ring. We've had, Evan Husney, friend of the show, on talk about it. We've talked about various dark sides over the last couple of years. Like, it's like this tried and true resource that you and I turn to have a documentary or something to talk about or something to do. But like, what, maybe it's wrapping up here as Vice's, I believe went bankrupt and could be going away. Who knows what will happen to their TV channel? I don't know if Darkside, like, do you think Darkside has legs? Do you want there to be more Darkside? Like, do you think of it as a perfunctory, again, content trove for us? Like, or do you actively enjoy watching this show still?
I mean, I think when it first came out, my expectations were different than what they are now, obviously, based on every hall pass I give it for season 4 versus in season 1, where I think if you go back and listen to the episode, there was a lot of scrutiny. And I think it's this, it's a show that it is what it is, but like, it does allow us to talk about like things like this and stories that aren't going to get their own WWE 24 episode on for the reasons why it exists in this form. Do I think it has legs? Every season that comes out surprises me because of a new story that I didn't even consider or think about. And like, was this the most salacious tale? Like, no, but that's okay because it's still like a story that is worth telling and worth sharing. That is a solid 42 minutes, 30 seconds of content about a topic in wrestling that's interesting enough for a fan. I mean, this thing isn't gangbusters. It's gangbusters for Vice.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean a whole lot these days. And, there's 200,000 people who will watch this, and part of them are us who are interested enough in Chris Candido to hope that they talk about the triple threat. And, maybe next season we learn that there aren't that many more stories. But, like, every season that happens surprises me with another few stories where I'm like, yeah, sure, let's watch that. It's not a waste of our time.
Yeah, I'll say, so they've done 4 episodes this season. This is season 4, and it's been Chris and Tammy, Magnum TA, Eddie Graham and Mike Graham, who I believe are Florida bookers from back in the day, and then Doink the Clown with Matt Bourne mostly. But I mean, they're like, that does sound pretty good. Like Doink the Clown in particular. Like I can't say I'm gonna necessarily, but as you noted, if I'm not gonna watch the Eddie Graham episode or the Magnum T episode, I'll probably watch the Doink the Clown episode. And so it is hit or miss, but the ones that hit are matter. Like you said, for a channel like Vice, I can see why they keep bringing it back because it's a guaranteed. As wrestling, there's not many guaranteed viewer bases these days in entertainment. So if you can guarantee 250,000 eyeballs an episode, that's a lot all of a sudden. So,
yeah, and does it have legs beyond Vice? If Vice blows up tomorrow, like, yes, it does. I don't think it's Peacock, WWE Network, but like, there's plenty of other networks that need nonfiction entertainment these days, especially in the midst of a writer's strike. So I would say there's plenty of places that could land after this. But then again, Tales of the Territory was a thing that was kind of an offshoot of this, and it was what it was.
Yeah, you don't hear a lot of people talking about that. So
no,
but it's a good. I mean, I think certainly I imagine their viewer numbers would speak the same. People probably care about the Candido episode. If you're going to think about these 4 I just talked about, I imagine Doink and Candido are the ones that get eyes and comments, and people tuning in and interested. Like Eddie Graham, I get why. I'm glad they go beyond the obvious ones, but I would suspect those are probably not the most viewed episodes they put out there. So, but
probably not.
That makes sense. There's only so much they can tell. These have been told a million times over. But I enjoy that it exists because we can turn to it in a pinch. But like you said, I really enjoy when they get somebody in there who actually knows what they're talking about. I just don't think that is always the case, and I'm sure from booking these kind of shows, Walt, like there's you can have a good idea that may fall apart in production because the people you think are talking are the people that are supposed to be interesting or not as interesting as they were billed as. But so when you get 4 people who know a subject and they can share a story or 2 each, there's a lot of substance there that I tend to enjoy more than the other ones.
Yeah, there's so many stories die on the vine because one family all decides together they don't want to participate, and then suddenly you have nothing.
Yep.
And I'm sure in wrestling, I'm surprised it doesn't happen more. But I think in the case of wrestling, you have a lot of people who want to hold on to the spotlight for as long as possible. So I feel like you're gonna always get someone to tell the story who has quote unquote credibility. It's just to your point, in this one they kind of got the right voices, and that was positive.
Yep.
It meant more.
It sure did. It had a lot more weight to it. And so if you want to watch this episode, Dark Side of the Ring season 4 is airing right now on Vice. Chris and Tammy was the first episode of the season. There's plenty more coming, and I'm not gonna give it a treat, Walt, but I will give it I'll give it an attaboy maybe. We haven't defined that.
Wow.
I'll give it a good try. I'll give it like an attaboy is like a good try. It's like go get him, Tiger, that sort of thing.
I love this scale. We're developing the scale in real time, guys.
In like episode 152.
Yeah, shit treat, attaboy, treat. I don't know. I'm sure
It's
there's
very
Freudians.
involving.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to hear us talk more about Dark Side of the Ring, we've done it so many times over the last 5 years or so. But you can find all those episodes at awesometruth.libsyn.com. You can also find all our episodes on all the podcast apps: Spotify, Stitcher. People still use Stitcher, Apple Podcasts. They're all there. So you can go back, listen to Dark Side, and subscribe and listen to all of our new episodes. They are all coming out every other week. And you can find us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at awesometruthpod. Well, great to talk Dark Side with you. Even if it wasn't the treat of treats, it's still nice. And Chris Candido, a guy from our past. Tammy Sytch, also a woman from our past. And it's always fun to revisit those glory 1995 to 1997 days.
Yeah, we hope we get an attaboy for this episode, reminiscing about our time looking at borderline smut on the playground at 5th grade.
Fans, if you enjoyed this episode, please find us on somewhere and give us an attaboy. So.
Yeah. Otherwise known as 5 stars in our case.
That's right. Just give us 5 stars, please. Thank you all so much for listening. And remember, the truth will set you free.